Exploring Your Identity Workshop Series number 8, session number 8. And this is a series of sessions that is a collaboration between the University of California campuses and UCEAP. And so today we are having our workshop on living and studying abroad with an accommodation or disability. And it's my pleasure today to be joined by my colleagues from University of California Education Abroad Program, Noah Cutchins, Associate Program Director, and colleagues from the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange, which is run by Mobility International USA. So we have today joining us Lori from Mobility International, Justin from Mobility International, myself, Yana, Lauren, Rachel, May, and one of our superstar alumni, Matthew, who's going to talk a little bit later during our panel. So as we get, I just want to let everybody know that we will have a Q&A session at the end, so you can ask questions at that time, unless it's easier to save your questions. But without further ado, I'd like to get started. And I think, Gina, are you going to talk about some statistics? Oh, wait, sorry, it's me. I just wanted to go over what our goals are for this workshop. And for this particular session, we want to come away with a good understanding of what preparation and planning means for studying abroad with an accommodation or disability, and identifying practical challenges and barriers, and advocating for oneself and what that means. So those are some goals, and we'll talk about at the very end about hopefully achieving those goals.
All right. Hi, Yana here. Some data is always helpful for context. So in 2019-20, students with disabilities represented 1 in 8 students who studied abroad. And while the largest proportion of students with disabilities going abroad are students with a mental or psychological disability, as well as students with learning disabilities, there's really a range of disability types represented in the data. So if you are a student with a disability or need accommodations and you're thinking about study abroad, which is why you're here, please know that you are not alone on this journey. And we also know that everyone has unique needs and interests. Students who share the same disability type might not have the same needs. So this workshop is really going to help you understand what considerations that you want to think about and what resources are available to you so that you can have an incredible time abroad.
All right, Lori.
All right. Well, my name is Lori Laird, and I am the program manager for the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange, which is administered by Mobility International, or MIUSA. And so glad that you all have joined for this workshop today. I'm going to share a little bit about who we are and what we do at what we call the Clearinghouse. Our goal is to increase the participation of people with disabilities in international exchange or international education between the United States and other countries. So this can be studying abroad, volunteering abroad, teaching, research, both what we call inbound, coming to the US, or outbound, going outside of the US. How do we do that? We provide educational resources about disability and international exchange, and I'll share a little bit more about that on the next slide. Our audience, or who we work with, it's really anyone who has a role or interest in international exchange. So that can be people with disabilities and their families. It can be international education professionals, international exchange providers, really anyone, I said, who has an interest in international exchange. We are sponsored by the Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, and we've been around since 1995. And all of our resources have really been compiled with collaboration of people with disabilities and professionals in the field. Go to the next slide. So what is it that we offer, or what do we do? We have lots of resources available in our robust resource website. We have tip sheets and personal stories. We've captured lots of experiences of people who have studied abroad all over the world, or who have come to the US from other countries. We publish a journal that's called A World Awaits You, or the Away Journal, that has different themes and again features best practices and stories of individuals who have had international exchange experiences. Our website has webinars, videos, podcasts, lots of resources. And then we offer a few programs as well, something called the Access to Exchange Summit, which is designed especially for people with disabilities who are new to international exchange. We have something called the Access to Exchange Externship, which happens in the spring. And this might be something of interest to you after you study abroad, about sharing about your experience and helping with outreach. And then something that we offer was we call it our inquiry and referral service. You can write to us with any question, and we will do our best to try and answer your question, either pulling from the resources that we have available or trying to research it and find out the answers to support you in whatever it is that you are looking to do in your international exchange experience. So takeaway, a big takeaway from today, we hope, is knowing that the Clearinghouse is an available resource to support you in your international exchange journey. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Justin.
Thanks, Lori. And going on to the next slide, but just as a quick note too, if you do plan on studying abroad during the spring, then you may even be able to be a part of the externship while you're abroad. We just recently, in this latest iteration, made the externship available to students who are currently going abroad. And it does pay an honorarium, which is not a lot, but it may also kind of help a little bit with certain living costs. So that may also be an incentive. And so we hope that you'll look into those opportunities. So on this slide now, we're talking about what do you want to do? And it can seem like this isn't really disability related, but for a lot of people with disabilities, it can a lot of issues can tie into this that are related to your disability. Many people will ask us, what's the best place to study abroad for people with disabilities? And oftentimes this can come into play more, say, for people with physical disabilities who already are kind of thinking about access abroad, and they're thinking about, well, much of the world probably isn't going to be accessible for my wheelchair, so I better figure that out. But it can also come into play for students who maybe are concerned about cultural attitudes around learning disabilities or mental health, among other, just as to give another example. And while it is a trade-off, and while it does involve a lot of different kind of balance, well, it is kind of a balancing act, we try to urge you first to think in terms of just what are your goals. And so on this slide, you kind of can see it's like we're writing an essay. It's like we're writing a story in college writing 1A or something. It's who, what, where, when, and why. And we want to get you to just start thinking about that. What kind of a program do you want to do? Is it like a short-term program? Is it a semester program? Where do you want to do it at? So of course that could be the country, but it might also be, for example, a university. It might be a volunteer site, maybe interning with a nonprofit. So it may be the country, but it also may be an organization that you might go with. Who do you want to do it with? So remember, you could study abroad with Americans. You could study abroad with people in the host country. You could study abroad with a mix. When do you want to do it's important? And then why do you want to do it? And I think the why is really kind of the big thing that is going to tie everything else together. For example, if your goal is to just get kind of an international experience and your major is engineering, then you might be able to get that in Germany, but then you might be able to get that in Chile. But then there might be reasons why, say, the UK might be a better option for you, or Ireland, depending on your situation. And it might not really matter so much where you study engineering if you don't have a particular interest in a particular country or culture or language. Whereas like if your goal is to study Russian, then you really may only have one or two countries in the world right now where you could actually do that. We actually advised a student with severe physical disabilities recently who was doing a program in Tbilisi, Georgia, where one of the few places in the world where he could go and do an immersion program in Russian. Going on to the next slide, but what about reasonable accommodations, or I'll just maybe call them RAs? How should you be thinking about that? And the way we want you to kind of start about it is just first make a list of what kinds of reasonable accommodations do you need to be successful right now. So what RAs are kind of supporting you as say you're at UC Davis or UC Santa Cruz or wherever in California? What's helping you to be successful? And that's academic reasonable accommodations, maybe like what you're coordinating with your Disability Resource Center, extra time on tests, or alt media if you're blind like I am. But it could also be even things that are non-academic that you're not really coordinating with your university, but it's happening anyway. Like maybe you're taking paratransit to get to school, or maybe you're receiving services of a PCA, or recently I heard of a story, a student with autism was getting, his parents were driving him to school every day and providing certain living supports for him. So it was kind of an independence thing that he hadn't really thought about as something that was going to be a factor when he went abroad. So a part of his community supports that he wasn't going to have. And then once you kind of figured that out, which of those are going to be available to you abroad? And so some of these might, like if it's an adaptive device, like I took my cane with me, that was an accommodation that I was using to get around, and I was able to take that with me. I took a smartphone with me. That's another example. There might be other accommodations where you might have to find something else while you're in the host country. A medication, for example, if you were going to go abroad for more than a certain amount of time, like say 90 days, you might actually have to get an accommodation in a medication in the host country. And then the next to last question is, or next to last question, if you can't take your RA with you, can you take it abroad? Can you do without it? So this is kind of where you start getting into maybe certain trade-offs. So I knew of a student with ADHD. She recently presented actually a webinar on studying abroad. She spent her time in Sweden, and because of a mix of factors, she wasn't able to get her ADHD medications. She wasn't able to get a sufficient supply to last her for the entire program. So she partially went without. The way she handled it was she basically went without. She had a limited supply. So most of the time she wasn't taking her medications except when she needed to concentrate, like for a test or a term paper, and then she would take her medications. And then apart from that, she would just kind of have to make do. So it may not always be that way, by the way, if you have ADHD, but that is what an example of how it might look. Is there an alternative RA is kind of the last thing to be thinking about. So just as a kind of off the head example, like when I studied abroad, I didn't really have access to a regular alternative media service to convert materials in accessible format so my screen reader could handle it. So what I did was I recruited volunteer human readers while I was abroad, and that was something that I just arranged myself. And that was an alternative reasonable accommodation that helped me to kind of keep it together while I was studying abroad. Is the next slide disability in other countries? Yes, okay.
Yes.
So disability in other countries, I just wanted to kind of include this as kind of, we get some questions about what's it like, there can be anxieties about, do people understand learning disabilities abroad? What about, is the space abroad going to be physically accessible? Am I going to be welcome? So just a few thoughts for you, that there are people with disabilities in every country. In addition to that, just about everywhere. And I would say, in fact, 100% of countries where you would choose to go abroad, because in terms of the countries where there's programs, I would say 100% of those, they've ratified and signed the CRPD, and probably nearly all of them have passed some sort of legislation that's related to disability rights. Actually, when I studied abroad in Chile in 2010, right as I was doing my classes, they were in the process of passing a disability rights law in Chile, which I think is pretty based in the social model. And I know that about 5 years later, they wrote up some regulations that kind of outlined what accessible buildings look like and so forth. So and there was another country in the world that took that long too. I think you live in it, right? So, but we've all been there and done that. And so that's one thing to think about. And how are accommodations handled? Well, in higher income countries, what I'll call, if you go to a place like the UK, for example, you're probably going to find that a lot of your accommodations are going to be handled the way they're handled in the US, on a formal basis, where you submit some documentation, you make some requests, and they get approved or they don't get approved. And and then you hopefully receive them. And I think in many cases, what you're going to find is it's done very similar. Although there are certain situations where there might be differences, like I believe in certain places in Europe, for example, they won't give you more than, I think, like 1.5 times. So there can be some little things like that. But if you're doing it's that's why, you know, we'll talk later about doing research. And low/middle income countries would handle accommodations on a more ad hoc basis. So, you know, if you're in, like when I was in Chile, for example, my teacher approached me on the second week or so before we were about to have our midterm and just basically asked me if I needed extra time on the test. And that was how the accommodations worked there. So are we going to talk? I think there's going to be an accommodation policy slide for EAP.
Yes.
Take it away.
That is me. Thank you, Justin. So I'm going to really briefly talk about what the process is going to look like when you're going to be requesting your accommodations. Keep in mind, I'm going to be mostly talking from the lens of if you go through UCEAP, though if you go through a non-UCEAP program, for example, a faculty-led program or another program, the process will probably be quite similar. So one thing I just want to say, and this is going to be a common theme throughout this session, is that communication is key. It really helps to be open communication with your disability services office and our office and your host institution. You know, when we find out that students need accommodations very late, it's so much harder for any staff to help. So communication, early disclosure, keep us in the loop. Let us know what's going on. Communication between all the parties who are here to support you is going to be extremely important in this process. As Justin just mentioned, accommodations abroad may be different than the ones that you get back home. And what you're going to start doing on this early part of the process, again, as Justin just mentioned, is think about the things that are integral to your success, things that you might be able to adjust a little bit, and then some things you might be able to do without. The accommodations you get at home may not match exactly what are available abroad. If you do go through UCEAP, you will be getting information on this process in your pre-departure process. So you don't have to keep this memorized, but I'm just going to kind of give you a quick overview. Your first step is going to be meeting with your disability services specialist on your campus. You're going to get a letter from them that says your name, which program you're going on, and then it'll list the accommodations you were approved for on your campus. All of the UC campuses are very familiar with this process, and they do send us letters all the time. So when you go to talk to them about this, they'll know, they'll know what you'll be looking for. The next step is going to be taking that letter to your study abroad office. If you're going with UCEAP, that's going to go to our system-wide office. And again, these instructions will be in your pre-departure checklist. Someone from our office will then tell you what the next steps are. So if you do have an accommodation for a reduced course load, our academic specialist will talk with you about that, because there's going to be some restrictions on how low you can go. Some programs are very flexible, some are not flexible at all. And so those are the kinds of conversations we'll have with you early on, so you can make a decision about whether a reduced course load is possible for you. And then as far as the nuts and bolts on the other parts of the accommodations, our staff will be putting you in contact with the appropriate people abroad. And that could take a variety of different setups. It could be a disability office, it could be a wellness center, it could be a specific person abroad. We will let you know who you need to talk to about getting your accommodations abroad. Some of our universities that we partner with and some of our third-party providers will talk to you very early, and they'll sit down and they'll go over your accommodations list and talk to you about what's possible to get. Some will say, great, we have your letter, we'll talk to you when you get on site. We'll sit down and you'll talk with the specialist here and we'll work out your accommodations there. So again, that's going to just vary depending on the program that you go on. And you can kind of take that with your own comfort level. If you want to know now what accommodations you need to get, what you can get, I should say, we can. That's something that we can help you know ahead of time. If you find out, oh, this university isn't going to sit down with me until I get on site, and I'm not comfortable with that, then we need to try and find you a different program to go on. And as Justin mentioned, the kinds of things that you'll be talking about with the specialists abroad are things like, he's correct. In Europe, mostly it is time and a half. And some of our students have double time on tests. So you'll have to sit down and think about whether you think time and a half is something you can work with or not. So that's the general process. Again, it does take communication between all these different parties, and communication is key. And you know, we are here to help, and we just kind of want you to start thinking about this process early on so that you can get it rolling when you've selected your program.
Thank you. So now kind of the slides from here on are going to be, at least the ones I've got here, they're going to be largely logistical, and some of them may apply to you and some of them may not. And I don't know, from my point of view, if you have a question, you can just interrupt me and ask your question, and we're going to hear from EAP on a few of these slides, but just to keep that in mind. So looking at all of this is really, how do you, I mean, and all of these I think too are going to center around research. And like for me, I mean, I think when I studied abroad, it was probably a little different. The way I handled my accommodations as a blind student was essentially on my own. When I did Chile, for example, I was pretty much arranging all of my stuff myself. And that involved a lot of research. I basically was actually like writing to faculty at universities, at host campuses abroad, and just sort of asking them like, how is it for blind students there? And I was writing to disability offices. You know, I was trying to decide too between different countries. And so I was actually writing to people in the different countries, and kind of based on the responses I was getting or not getting, I was trying to sort of get ideas. I even like, and I was searching like websites of blindness organizations and stuff. So I was doing a lot of like research. And you're going to hear some of the topics that you might want to learn about if depending on your disabilities. So on this first slide now, we're talking about flights. And so, you know, all flights have an accommodation policy, and all airlines also have a website that's specifically about disability and reasonable accommodation policies, whether you're talking about United Airlines or American Airlines, or whether you're talking about Lufthansa, which is a German airline, or China Air. I mean, whether they're American carriers or foreign carriers, if you just Google carrier name plus disability accommodation policy, you'll find it. It's there, and they'll talk about what you need to do if you're going with a device like an adaptive, like a wheelchair, or if you're traveling with an animal, or if you're traveling with medical supplies. So that's the best place to start. Oftentimes you have to contact them a few days in advance to arrange your accommodations. And typically in terms of medical supplies, and that could include medications, it could include like pumps, syringes, it could include supplies for a guide dog. All of those would be considered medical supplies, and you should take those supplies on with you. First of all, you should not check them in, you should carry them with you. And second of all, they should not count against your carry-on limit. You should not be charged for those. I can definitely say for flights where the Air Carrier Access Act applies, you should not be charged. But you do have to have all medical supplies in a bag. So if there are other personal items that are mixed in with your diabetes supplies, for example, then it may not really pass as a bag of medical supplies. So that is something you have to keep in mind. And then when it comes to traveling with a wheelchair, you can check one chair for free, usually, and you have the option to gate check the chair, which is to say it'll allow you to have it during a transfer if you've got a long layover, or you can check it up at the front desk, and then you'll be getting transported by the airport throughout your flight. On the next slide, if you do use a chair or a scooter, you might want to you're going to be thinking about this, how to avoid broken equipment. So for the most part, they pretty much will just be able to put your chair on whole. If it's a power chair, for example, I'm specifically talking about that. Manual chairs are a little bit simpler. They can usually just fold them up, and again, they may check it, but even with power chairs, they'll usually just put it in whole. But in some cases, if a chair is really large and they can't roll it through the entrance, they may have to take certain pieces off of it. So you'll want to make sure that you're including instructions on how to just disassemble those parts of the chair that they would need to take apart when loading it. You may need to consider bringing voltage converters, and that's not just like a physical plug adapter, but it's also like an actual voltage up, down, up converter that'll change your so that you can say with your 110 volt converter, you can charge on 220 volts that you might find in a different country. And the best way to go about figuring if you need that or not is to check with the manufacturer of your wheelchair. So I'd imagine, of course, your laptop nowadays will just sort of figure that out on its own. And I would imagine more chairs will be doing that. But I still have a friend who was telling me that her power chair, when she travels to Europe, she still has to take a voltage converter. You might also want to research places where a wheelchair could be repaired. If you're traveling with a manual chair, you can always, even bike shops can often figure that stuff out. But if you are traveling with a power chair, you might want to make sure that there is a place nearby that can repair your chair. And sometimes perhaps checking with the manufacturer of your chair about whether they have branches or whether they have authorized repair shops in the place where you're going can be a good way to start. And if you're going to go to a place where there's a lot of bumps, where there's, say, cobblestones, for example, larger front casters can be a good solution for that. Or a free wheel can also be an option. Some of you might have heard of, there are other ways of, like, if you might just need an extra assist, for example, you could take your manual chair with you, but then you might have, say, a power drive, which is essentially a motorized device that essentially attaches to your chair and kind of just gives you some extra push. Moving on to personal care attendants. And really kind of what I say is the whole section of this presentation is all about support services. And we're going to first start by talking about support services provided by humans, and then EAP, I think we'll talk about support services provided by non-humans. But you can usually find a PCA at home or in the host country. And if you use PCA services, you probably already even know a few people. And you may be able to check with VR. I don't know what the rules are with Medicaid or VR in California, but we've known of in some cases, people have been able to use vocational rehabilitation if you have a case open with them and you can prove that it's about becoming employable. And it may seem ridiculous, but I've also heard of cases, say, for example, in New Hampshire or Nebraska, where the Medicaid providing agency has actually also volunteered to continue providing funding for somebody's PCAs when they went abroad. And you may need to check with the exchange program about extra housing. Again, that's going to be kind of up to each site, how that works. And if you're going to be abroad for more than what a tourist visa would last for, then you might just kind of want to note that your PCA may have different immigration requirements if they're not a part of the program. But that is really fluid. Sometimes PCAs are a fellow student. Sometimes they're a friend who's maybe in a nursing program, and this is sort of part of a practicum that they figured out that they've been able to work out. And sometimes it could be somebody in the host country. For example, we knew somebody who did a short-term program where they did a filming project in the Czech Republic, and they were actually able to find a PCA by reaching out to through some local newspapers. And this was a woman who was looking to pick up a few bucks on the side when she was not at her job at a care home. Now on to the next collection of human providers. We have sign language interpreters. And so again, this is just extremely fluid. You can find interpreters in your host community. Say if you study abroad in the UK, your host institution may just provide interpreters, and you may be able to get even interpreters who can interpret to American Sign Language as a contrast to, say, British Sign Language. On the other hand, we've seen universities, actually there's a really old story of where University of California, Santa Cruz, many years ago, even before I was in college, they paid for an interpreter to go abroad with a student to the UK. So that we actually have that story on our website. So that can be a possibility. And again, maybe VR is an option. I'm not sure, but you'd have to check with them. And maybe disability services on your campus would be an option for, say, a short-term program, but again, you'd have to check with them. And you should just kind of note that for ASL, again, as I mentioned, I mean, it may be a little bit of a different story. If you're going to a country where even English-speaking countries, they use a different sign language. So finding ASL interpreters may be a different experience for you if you're looking for those kinds of services. You might be learning a new language, whereas other students will maybe still be kind of just trying to take the English program, but your experience will be more interesting. So And just on the last note, just clarifying expectations on when interpreters should provide services. We have a whole section on our website about actually contracts and kind of working out. Many interpreters are, and many folks who are in the business of contracting with interpreters understand that they charge by the hour, but we've seen interpreters willing to take negotiated deals where maybe they'll have a restricted number of hours a day that they're actually getting paid on the program, so that it ultimately would work out to be a lump sum that the interpreter's collecting, and then they're maybe getting some supports with living costs or travel costs on the program, but then outside of program hours, they're on their own and they're not continuing to make money while they're sleeping or something like that. So that can be kind of a way to keep interpreter costs a little more quote unquote on the reasonable side. So now we're talking about we're talking about service animals, and I think that is going to be EAP. Is that right?
That's right.
Take it away.
Ian again. Thanks, Justin. So service animals can be a big help to students who need them while they're abroad. But the rules about bringing an animal abroad may vary by country, and it can change over time. So if you're interested in bringing a service animal to a study abroad location, we really suggest that you check with the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. They have a page dedicated to taking animals abroad. And they have a list of guidelines that you could search for by each country. So for example, for the European Union countries, they require either an EU pet passport or an EU health certificate. Other countries often have other health certification that needs to be presented. Some island countries like New Zealand may require you to quarantine an animal upon arrival. And there's so much more on there on the website that you can just kind of, search and peruse. You might have to verify that your dog is trained by a school certified by ADI, which is Assistance Dogs International. And that's because many countries don't recognize handler trained service animals. You may also want to consider whether the country has a large stray dog population and how that might interfere with your service animal. And just in general, it's useful to look into how dogs are perceived in the country and in the culture. Something important that we want to point out is that emotional support animals are not considered service animals in most countries, and knowing that distinction would help you as you make your plans for going abroad. And that's it for service animal.
I just wanted to add that when it comes to flights, and she mentioned ADI, there's two types of flights. There's US, non-US flights, where United States is one of it's either the destination or the beginning, and then there's non-US flights. And so in the non-US flights, that is where you're going to kind of get into, they can ask you for documentation, and that's where ADI would come in as a factor. Whereas so that often happens where people are flying, say New York to Frankfurt, great, no problem, worked out really easy. My self-trained service animal was able to get through no problem. And then Frankfurt to Paris, where's your papers, and then it becomes an issue where, I trained it myself, doesn't really fly anymore. So that's something to be thinking about. If you got a self-trained animal, maybe that can work, but you may have to have a direct flight, for example, but that's something you're going to want to research.
Okay, well, I wanted to speak to travel insurance and for the UC and the UCEAP's travel insurance. And first thing we want to make sure you understand is that the plans do not exclude care for medically necessary treatment for pre-existing conditions. Preventative care is not included, however, in the UC travel insurance policies. So those are important points to know. For clarification, I would just also want to let all of our students know that we have a robust health and safety team that can answer specific questions related to specific cases as they come up. You can also check and see if you're covered by a national healthcare service. A lot of countries around the world have national healthcare systems that cover you, whether you're a national or a visitor. And we also want to say that accommodation costs are not covered by the travel insurance. Lastly, there are fellowship programs like Fulbright that may help cover elevated healthcare costs and with some reasonable accommodations. So those are another area to look more into more information about. Now, medications.
Yeah, so I also do want to preface this with what Noah just said, that if you go through UCEAP, we do have a really robust health and safety team that's going to help with these types of questions as you get closer, and as you give your information to us, they'll be able to advise. So you don't have to, again, memorize this information, but it's just to give you some general context. For shorter programs, you can typically get a 90-day supply of medications before you leave. So if you're going on a summer program or another short-term program, that may work out very well. Pain control and psychotropic medications may be considered controlled substances in other countries. So you may need to have a conversation with your doctor about whether you need to change medications, or whether, you need to consider whether you can go abroad with your medication background. You're going to want to check the policy of the country of where you are going through the International Narcotics Control Board or the embassies. As we previously mentioned earlier in this session, you do want to travel with your medications in your original packages, accompanied by a letter from the prescribing doctor noting your medical diagnosis, condition, treatments, and prescription medications, including their generic name and dosage. Customs officials may ask to see this letter, and just be sure to have that in your carry-on. You typically cannot send medications through the mail, so please don't make that part of your plan. Okay, no sending medications through the mail. And prescriptions from your US doctor may actually be enough for pharmacies in your host country, so that's something you can look into as well.
Okay, so I think we've covered the nuts and bolts area of this webinar, and now we'd like to invite one of our alumni, Matthew, to answer some questions or share his respective experience participating in UCEAP last summer. Are you there, Matthew?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, well, good to see you again, Matthew.
Good to see you.
So just quick introduction. Tell us what campus you're from and where you studied abroad, when. I know it's on the screen, but it's helpful. You give some context.
Yeah, so I studied abroad last summer. I'm from UCSD. I studied last summer in Mexico City. It was a 5-week summer program. So basically it was summer session 1. It was from late June to early August. And it was a political science program. I'm a poli-sci major, international affairs at UCSD. And the program was basically doing a Mexican politics class, and then additionally Spanish, quarter of Spanish, and then a 2-unit cross-cultural class.
And what were your main considerations when you were looking for programs?
So my initial consideration was looking at, so I became an RA last year and have continued that job. So my main thing was I wanted to have a summer program. And I guess originally was just, I wanted to study abroad at some point. And I've had a lot of medical challenges over the last 10 years. I use a manual wheelchair and used to have a lot less strength than I do now. So it's been a long buildup, but since I was in high school or even a little bit younger, I'd been like, I want to go internationally at some point. So it'd always been kind of a dream of mine, but kind of one that I wasn't sure if I'd be able to accomplish. And so then when it was kind of early last year and I had just started taking Spanish, actually, I was in like my first class of it, but I was like, I really think the best ways to continue learning the language is going to be taking it abroad. And so I looked on UCEAP's little list of different courses, found this one that was summer. It was political science. I just switched to political science as well. It kind of checked all the boxes classes wise. It was Mexico, which was a bit of an easier sell for my parents who were a little concerned with like, okay, like I had never been internationally before. So somewhere that was a bit closer, price tag was right in my range. Mexico, overall, the cost of living is very low. And then also being in a big city like Mexico City, there are many people, and kind of like what they were talking about earlier, that every country has a lot of people or has a population of people with disabilities. And I think those populations tend to be concentrated in urban areas, and places like Mexico City. I did research on it, and they had been making some strides recently in how they their accommodation levels, and definitely was not perfect, but enough to like make things work for sure. So I think, yeah, the price, location, program, and then kind of figuring out that accessibility portion were my primary considerations.
And regarding your preparation, what were the special considerations you think were most important as you prepared for the program or to accommodate your disability, or things you wish you had done differently?
Primarily the three main things were looking at how I was going to get there with like the flight, the space that I was living in, and then the space I'd be like doing the classes in. So the flight was a lot of kind of that what you guys were also talking about earlier with the communication aspect, talking to my advisor here, but actually also just different friends that I knew had traveled to Mexico, and be like, hey, what's the best airline to fly to Mexico? What's the most reliable? Who do you think would take the best care of my wheelchair and stuff? And so I got pointed to Aeromexico, and so I ended up going with them. They're a little bit more expensive, but very good airline, and glad I did. And they took good care of the chair, and I was able to look on their website and kind of figure out what accessibility things they would offer. And then the housing was probably the biggest aspect because of the wide variety, and then they had to kind of find a specific space that was close enough to the campus, was accessible enough. So that was communicating with the program advisor on the ground there, and she found an apartment nearby that that worked well. It wasn't perfect, and there's certain things that I kind of had to compromise on, like the bathroom situation where showering, it was basically like a plastic chair and a shower. And it was very difficult to get in there, but I could. So I only showered like twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. But it was kind of a compromise I had to make to use that space because it was the most convenient space for getting access to the campus. And then I was also lucky that I would be studying at a UC center. And so they were fairly accessible, but the lift was broken for the entirety of the duration I was there to get to one of the classrooms. So they made sure to put my class on the accessible floor. So just kind of that working with them and making sure they were best set up, even with their limitations of, our lift's broken, things like that, to make sure I had a space that would work for me.
And how did you adapt to those situations? What was your perseverance, or your little victories, or the things that you were maybe the most frustrating as you encountered them?
Probably the city was always a surprise. Like, it would surprise me in various ways, where certain things would be like, how is this not accessible? And then some things where there'd be like a lift to the second floor of a restaurant, and I'd be like, what? I'm shocked it's here, and it's like in this perfectly hidden, like, modern compartment. And I think some of the biggest frustrations came with a few of just the curb. There'd just be no lift, or like no ramp to get up on it, and it would just be a huge curb. And cobblestone streets. I didn't realize how much I hated those, especially just really old cobblestone streets, until I was there. And so I had to adjust the way I went to school. Most people, kind of the shortest way was going through on these kind of back streets that were all cobblestone. And after day one, I was like, nope, not doing that again. And I took the main road, which ended up being a thing that I really enjoyed, because that was where all the vendors were. I got to walk by the same vendors every morning, saying hi, or like, picking up a torta or something. And so it looking at it as a new opportunity instead of like I'm not doing what everyone else is doing was definitely beneficial. And I think I got a lot more out of it because of that mindset.
Sounds like you found a better route.
Yeah. For sure. I think so.
With the vendors. And what do you think were the biggest outcome for you personally? What would you say was the takeaway from your overall experience, and just in general from study abroad, and how it's helping you going forward?
I think that the takeaway, yeah, I think probably that I could just do it was like a huge thing for me, that I was able to be gone for 5 weeks. And I think back to it, I'm like, oh, it's such a big thing. And now it just seems like, oh, it's just something that I did. And I'm like, oh wow, I was really concerned about like not being able to, just do it was a scary thing living in another country on my own for 5 weeks and now having the support system that I do at UCSD. And so I think, yeah, one takeaway that, yeah, just I could go. And then the other being just the international experience and kind of getting to get into a rhythm of life there, walking on the same street every day and interacting with different people. Like I've never lived in an area where street vendors were a common occurrence, or even somewhere that I walked to school every day. And kind of seeing how the modern aspects of the city interacted with the more traditional and the layers of history that were built there was really cool. And now something that I kind of look more for back here in the US, even though the history is not as deep in Southern California in certain aspects, but something that, yeah, I now have taken with me in my studies back here.
Do you talk to students about your experience and address some of the concerns they have in all aspects? I know there's a lot of barriers perceived and real about the study abroad experience. So how would you communicate to students who are encountering those barriers?
Yeah, I think that it's definitely like I didn't think the level like going away was even possible at first, and then communicating with everyone each step of the way and just starting the process and seeing where I got. And I think that's really the biggest step someone can take is just beginning and then just keep pushing forward that there are a lot of things people can do, even if it's not the most obvious. Or if somewhere looks like, okay, this is just big foreign city, I don't even know where to start to find resources, that there will be a path made for you and people are really willing to help you along the way, especially advisors. And even like the first day I got there, like the advisor that had been communicating on the ground with, she came up to me and she's like, hey, like I have, this for like a tour we are going to do like 2 weeks later. She was like, I like, it's not accessible for like most of it where the tour's going. I got you a whole nother tour guide that she's a local business that does accessible tours. Like you're helping her out, she's helping you out. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Like, and I didn't know that was going to be a thing. I knew that trip was going to happen before I left. And I was like, I have no idea if I'm going to be able to do it. And I didn't let that be like, okay, well, if I'm not going to do exactly everything the way everyone else is going to be, then it's going to stop me from going. So I think entering with that mindset that you will make the trip your own and you'll get out of it what you put in and the attitude you bring to it. So I think that would be what I tell people.
I also want to invite anyone to ask Matthew questions from students or my fellow colleagues. But Matthew, can you recall an instance or where you had to advocate for yourself, or and how you followed through on that?
Let's see. I think it was just a kind of a small but pivotal moment, or a good chunk of the trip I was with other students from it, where we were we go around and see different sites together. One day I decided to go off. I'm like, I'm going to take the Metro bus and I'm going to go down and visit one of the forests. And so I did. And on my way back, at every Metro bus stop, there is a kind of a turnstile, and there's a guard there, a police auxiliary guy or girl that's standing there, and they have to open a gate for you because people that have disabilities ride free, but you can't get through the turnstile. I get there, I'm by myself, there's no one at the gate, and so I can't get through, and I don't see the guy. So it started me like using my very limited Spanish, like having to be like, hey, like, could you guys help me like find the guy, because I can't even get into the area to go look for where that guy would be. And turns out he was like in the break room or something, using the restroom, or like eating, I don't know, he was eating lunch, I think. But so I had to just kind of utilize the people, the random strangers around me in another language. And it was kind of scary, because I was like, I don't have anyone to like, like it would take, I was like, I don't even know how to get someone else down here to help me. And this is the only way I can get back to the main campus. So those little moments of like advocating and being like kind of having to trust the people around you, and I think trusting that most people are very helpful. And I ran into so many helpful people and being like, hey, could you help me carry my chair down these stairs into the metro? Was another thing, yeah, that I had to do. And people will surprise you a lot. So just be willing to reach out.
And just from a personal growth perspective, do you feel like these experiences were they gave you more confidence or new insights into how to continue to advocate for yourself, or things that you're going to take with you next time you're traveling around the world?
Yeah, I think so. I definitely have a better idea of like how to navigate the public transport system. I'm planning on going to England this summer actually, and I'm now kind of approaching my research a bit more methodically and with a bit better of a picture in mind about how a foreign city transportation system would operate. And
When you say
seeing
methodically, what would be the method or the methodical process?
kind of I guess it would be like I didn't think about things like, oh, there's a certain gap this big between where I need to get on in the Metrobus, and I just learned how to jump that gap into it. And things like that were like recognize like, okay, that little, some metro stations in England I'm now reading are like have it like this. Some are flat, some are, and so there's like these very little differences in how a system can operate and even just station to station that can drastically change how you would approach or if you would even use that space at all. And I think those small details are what I'm now a little bit more attuned with. Same with the cobblestone streets where, going to Europe and they're very heavily cobblestone and being ready for that and figuring out, okay, what areas do I want to travel in the city depending on what the terrain is. And I think that was probably the biggest takeaways, the little details. And then also coming back here and realizing I'm like, oh wow, I really appreciate that there's not this aspect and this aspect, and these things are just kind of there for me. That took a lot of generations and work before I was even alive to get to that point that those things would be just in place.
And what are your comparative perspectives now about cultures and how they perceive disability, or how they address the accommodation, transportation systems, education?
I think being in a really large city, uh, bigger than anything in the U.S., kind of the transportation system was a huge part because I think I used an Uber twice in my time there, or maybe 3 times. And the rest of the time, every day, I was using public transit, different places. And I think them recognizing everyone there, because it was usually police that were at each one, and be like, "Oh, hey, you're here. Let's help you get through these different things." And I had 2 police officers at one point helping me down an escalator, like they were holding behind as I was like traveling down an escalator because the elevator was broken in that station, and kind of they took personal responsibility, like, you know, we're the police force, we're gonna do this, and I think that, and also the number of people that offered random help. I'm like, yo puedo, I can do it, like I got it. But to just put, that in some ways is like, when I'm here in the US, I think I get a little bit more offended where I'm like, I got it, like I don't need help pushing, somewhere. But I think for it, kind of I think there was more of a attitude of helping people, and I think it was a bit more rare to see someone using a wheelchair, and people were more just eager, like, hey, can I help out in any way? And then the final thing, oh man, I forgot. That's okay. That's okay. But that's about all.
Oh, we're getting near the end of the webinar, so maybe a final question, and then also please, any questions you have, please, now's the time to enter them in the chat, and we'll do our best to get you answers or point you in the right direction. So last question I have for you, Matthew. If you were sending yourself a message back to Matthew pre-study abroad, and what would you want that Matthew to know that you know now?
Let's see. I think honestly, I would tell him to be a little bit more bold and I only started going off on my own, like right towards the end. I only did that a couple times, and just kind of exploring the city and not kind of waiting for other people to be like, ah, you know, we're tired, whatever. And I think I would, yeah, told myself to, yeah, just get out there more and trust that, you know, I was gonna find a way to make it around the city, because some of those moments that I just went off by myself were some of the most enjoyable. Oh, I think there's actually a question in there about the Mexico city or the buses. So it's actually several different types. There's this really cool, they have a cool system called the Metro bus, which is like a combination. It's the buses are in their own dedicated lane, and they actually are on platforms. So there's a platform you go up into, and then you I could get straight onto the bus from there. All the buses, and that's the one I use primarily. The Metro was very hit or miss with having elevators, and sometimes they would even say they had one, but it would be broken. So honestly, not very accessible. The Metro bus, I always had luck with their it being on level, and I could get right in, or it would have a ramp and I could get in. The regular city buses would also have a ramp, but they're really bad about like getting in the right spot for that ramp to actually be useful. And sometimes I would be kind of in a really tough, and like, yeah, I'd be kind of squished into cars trying to get off the bus. And maybe appreciate the bus drivers here, because they always make sure they get it right on the curb. But they there's enough transportation options in Mexico City that using the Metro is not 100% necessary. It was just a bit faster when it did work accessibility wise. I think that answered.
Okay, well, I think I want to move on just to our last two slides, but quickly, Matthew, would you be willing to answer questions directly that students may have, or if they want to reach out to you directly?
Yeah.
Okay, could you put your email address in the chat, perhaps, and that might be the best way.
I can put my email right here.
Well, thank you, Matthew. Okay, so
go for it.
Just going to move to our last two slides, where we want to make sure that you understand our takeaways and our next steps that we can provide for you.
So here are the key takeaways that we hope to leave you with after this presentation. Studying abroad is a wonderful opportunity, and different programs will suit different students depending on their priorities and goals. When researching your options, keep in mind that the ADA does not necessarily travel with you to your program abroad. This means that while accommodations abroad may be possible, they are not guaranteed, and/or they might be different on site. It will in part depend on the host country and university to determine what is available. Be flexible and have a backup plan. For example, if your first program choice is unavailable or unable to provide you with your needed accommodations, is there another program that you would be interested in? If there's a service animal that cannot go with you, would you be okay going without it? If you are on a medication that is illegal in your host country, can your doctor provide you with an alternative? If you use note-taking services and it is not available at your host university, would you be okay asking a classmate to help or hiring someone? Always remember that you have the support of your campus disabilities office, your campus study abroad office, and UCEAP as you navigate studying abroad. If you need something, please do not hesitate to ask us. We encourage students to start planning early and to let advisors know about their accommodation needs as soon as possible. This will help initiate the discussion about what is available abroad and also give you time to prepare accordingly.
Thank you, May. And for next steps?
Yeah, so we hope that this presentation has provided you with a starting point on your own study abroad journey. From here, you can explore your study abroad options by visiting the UCEAP website or your campus study abroad office website to research program options. Just keep in mind that application deadlines can be as early as 9 months prior to the start of the program. You should also reach out to your campus disabilities specialist to discuss your study abroad plans. If you've never previously worked with that office at your UC campus, you should reach out so a specialist can do an intake assessment to determine what accommodations you are eligible for. So many students find they may not need to use some or any of their accommodations while at their UC campus, but then while abroad, it's extremely helpful to know what accommodations are available and to be able to use them if need be. Then reach out to your campus study abroad office to begin the conversation of deciding on a program that is the best fit for you. And finally, take advantage of resources that the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange, NUSA, have provided on their website. So thank you for attending this session. I know that we are just after 5 o'clock now, but please feel free to send us any questions that you have via the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question too.
And just, we will also be posting this webinar on our website for future reference, and we'll have a text version of these slides for you to reference. Well, thank you, Justin. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Matthew. And of course, my dear colleagues, Yana, May, Rachel, and Lauren. Thank you for helping us execute this webinar today. And this is a webinar series number 8. And just for the plug, the next upcoming webinars, you can visit the UCEAP website for diversity, equity, inclusion. And that will list the upcoming webinars we're going to have for Asia Pacific Islander students and DACA students. I believe are the last 2 in the series.
Thanks, everyone.